Welcome to Reaction with me, Iain Martin, and I'm joined by Tim Montgomerie, my esteemed colleague. Today we're talking about the blue wall in the wake of last night's extraordinary by-election shock. And Tim, tell us a bit about what happened. I mean, the seat that the Tories lost is one they've held since it was created, and it was seen as a kind of rock-solid Tory seat, and it's now a Lib Dem game. What happened?
Well, that's a really good question, Ian. And I think, first of all, I have to admit, I don't know what your thoughts were yesterday, but this really wasn't even on my radar at all. I tweeted yesterday afternoon, is anyone talking about Chesham and Amersham? Because wasn't entirely sure that yesterday was voting day. So I really have to fess up, first of all. My eye was really off the ball. But it's clearly a big result. The Liberal Democrats are good at winning by-elections. I think they have behaved as they often do. They are opportunistic. They're supposed to be the party of the young, and yet a lot of their campaign in Chesham and Amersham was against house building. So it's a real NIMBY vote. And on a longer-term basis, I worry about that because yet again, we're seeing house prices rise in the UK. There's nothing, no event, no circumstance that seems to bring house prices within the reach of younger people. This will discourage every Conservative in the land from supporting more house building. I think that's my big sort of thinking about the nation rather than politics takeaway out of this. But the politics thing, I think, is just, there was HS2. There's a Remain Brexit thing happening as Southern voters, disappointed with some of the focus on the red wall of the Conservative Party in London. And I think that would be where I would end. That would be my big conclusion. How much of a issue is Southern voters going to be thinking that they're being taken for granted by Boris Johnson and the Conservatives? And you can wrap up all the individual issues like HS2 and house building in that. But is Boris Johnson going to have to start worrying about his southern flank? We may be in a couple of weeks' time celebrating, from a Conservative point of view, a victory in Batley and Spen, another Tory victory. That's what I'm hearing about that constituency. But is the Tory southern flank vulnerable to Liberal Democrat, Labour and Green Party insurgencies?
Yeah, I mean, when you see the response of some prominent Conservatives the morning after, and it really is quite a result. It was a 25% swing, a solid Tory seat that now has a Lib Dem majority of 8,000, and it was a turnout of more than 50%. I think 52%. So it's quite a crushing defeat for the Tories. But the response seems to be, and I know politicians always say desperate things after by-elections. This is how it works. With a sigh, they'll go out to deliver the line to take, and the line to take is lots of local issues, as you said, HS2 and planning, particularly because people don't want the nice fields around there, and it feels like a semi-rural location, even though it has very fast links into London. So it's commutersville, but it feels like the countryside, and they then don't want those fields built on, possibly for understandable reasons. But still, as you said, there is a real housing crisis. But the Tories responding to it can't have it both ways. They can't say that there's this fantastic, from their point of view, national realignment, a big cultural shift towards working class voters thinking differently about politics, as evidenced by the Tories smashing the red wall in the 2019 election, process which actually started in 2017 under Theresa May and has since accelerated, and then turn around and say when they lose a seat like this, well, actually it's just about local issues. Yeah. There's no big picture lesson to be drawn here. I think it's the flip side of this current debate, isn't it, about the cognitive elite and attention being focused on, the Tories are particularly focusing attention on working class voters and attracting a new kind of voter. And I think it's an example of, voters who are not that, voters who have a different set of instincts, can hear and do watch television and do pay attention to these things and pick up this sense that, as you said, maybe it's a feeling of having been taken for granted.
Yeah.
And it will also really worry CCHQ and the Tory leadership, because if you look at the cluster of seats around there, I mean, it should be, or would commonly be regarded as true blue territory, but it's more complex than that demographically. A seat like High Wycombe, which I think is next door, is certainly nearby. Steve Baker, the former ERG veteran of the Brexit wars, doesn't have a rock solid majority there. It's a seat that's changed a lot. I think he has a majority of about 4,000 or 4,200, and those sort of seats, even if it's not a 25% swing, on smaller swings than that, you could see the blue wall outside London go in a similar way to some of those seats in London that the Tories used to not take for granted, but used to hold with some confidence.
The donut.
Henry Hill wrote that for Conservative Home back after the May local elections, which on one level were good for the Tories, but he detected signs of, as he put it in the headline, the blue wall cracking. What though can the Tories do? Because they can't abandon Boris can't abandon the blue wall, the red wall strategy, can he?
No. I think there has to be some. I think two responses to what you said. I think it's brilliant what you just said. First thing I would say is that there has to be some acceptance that this is inevitable to some degree. You know, you look at what's happening in America as well. You look at what's happening in Australia. You are seeing sort of urban, sort of left-leaning voters, Remainers in the British context. You know, as they leave the cities, they're going to suburbs, they're going to exurbs, and they're voting Democrat or they're voting Labour in Australia, and they're going to vote differently in the UK as well. So there is something about long-term trends of the kind that we're not just seeing in Britain, around the world, that will mean there will be various suburban seats that the Tories have taken for granted in the past. They're where the ideas class, for want of a better expression, more upwardly mobile people, will mean those seats become more vulnerable. And in that sense, there is nothing the Tories can do about that. But I think the Tories have always been aware to some extent of this problem. And in that well-worn expression, levelling up, you know, it was deliberately devised because they didn't want to talk about equalising, you know, North and South, because they knew that would bring the South down. It was always about bringing the North up to, you know, the levels of infrastructure and public service provision that we have in the South. But, you know, the bigger problem may be in areas like the West Country. You know, the West Country is, you know, the South and places like Chesham and Amersham actually do get relatively good level of resources. It's more in the West Country, some of the rural parts of the UK, where actually they can legitimately say they need levelling up as much as anywhere in the North, some of the bus and community services there. So, yeah, government looks a little bit harder this morning than it did 24 hours ago.
Yeah, because the conversations I've been having in the last few weeks are all predicated on the assumption, I mean, in and around Westminster, that, I mean, you can never guarantee these things, but just that Boris is really set fair. The chatter is all about, and I've written about it as well, about him having aspirations now, or an assumption that he can go on and maybe even challenge Thatcher for her record spell in office. And it's, as you said, it turns out to be a lot more complex than that. The other thing is what it means for the Labour Party, where you know, there is this sense that, well, I think the Labour Party lost its deposit.
1.3, 1.4%, I think, you know.
Yeah. Exactly. So all part of that, you know, the Labour vote collapsed, and voters rediscovered tactical voting in a way of, you know, to bash the Tories. But I think ultimately Labour won't be bothered by that, because what they need this to happen.
Absolutely.
They need, in the South, they need the Tories to have the Lib Dems snapping at their heels, and that then creates it's probably too early for Batley and Spen. That then creates space for them in other parts of the country where Labour has traditionally been stronger but has a problem. And you can see the Tories getting unlucky if something goes wrong with the economy, with inflation, for example, of them being stranded electorally in no man's land. That will be the fear.
Yeah,
That they are not seen to have delivered for the Red Wall, but they're sufficiently culturally at odds with. And I don't think it's about the culture wars in terms of cancellation. It's not that. It's a state of mind. I would imagine, and we'll hear from people who run focus groups, that a lot of voters in places like that just view the current number 10 and the current occupant of number 10 with distaste. It's a cultural gulf, a question of manners and sensibility. And the danger for the Tories is that they'll find themselves trapped between those two groups of voters. But then Labour still no sign yet. As I said, we'll see in Batley and Spen what happens. Still no sign of a Labour revival. The other interesting thing that's happening in UK politics this week is in Northern Ireland, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it next week, because on Reaction on our site, we've got a special theme week on Northern Ireland with some great writers lined up, and we're also going to talk on YouTube about Northern Ireland with an array of experts. And of course, the story happening now is the resignation of Edwin Poots, and the DUP seems to be splintering. What's your instinct about this story, Tim?
Well, I was more worried. I think you've got some research you want to share with our viewers that actually should reassure Unionists. But I'm pretty socially conservative, but I was worried when Edwin Poots became leader, because I do regard our United Kingdom as a precious thing, and I want it to stick together. And there just seemed to be a clumsy approach to politics. A commitment to sort of high principle that just didn't seem to recognise any tactical compromise. And then, of course, he goes and makes this huge compromise over the Irish language to get his choice as First Minister in place, and upsets all his diehard supporters who thought he was going to be different. So he was trying to ride two horses and has obviously fallen spectacularly. But before you bring some good cheer to Unionists, I also think maybe if the DUP do end up with someone like Jeffrey Donaldson, who is also an evangelical. He's not a social liberal, but he just has that more tactical nous. I think the DUP may be in better hands, and so I think Jeffrey Donaldson came within 2 votes of defeating Edwin Poots in the recent leadership election. So I'd be very surprised if he doesn't now succeed. And I just say, as a sort of an aside, I am loving Arlene Foster's tweeting at the moment. She's becoming a bit of a star for me. Yesterday she was tweeting how she was having a lovely lunch and she wanted to hope everyone else was having a good day. I think she's going to become a little bit of a personality in British politics. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, she's been ill served and badly mistreated, and as you say, is clearly really enjoying the spectacle. But the DUP, the Poots business, it has a sort of Brexit Party UKIP meltdown feel to it, doesn't it? It's
and similar type of characters. Even, poor thing. Even the name Poots, it sounds all like from another age, doesn't it?
Being leader for 21 days, and yeah, I mean, I suppose the danger is from a London perspective. And there's a degree of confirmation bias on my part. I'm a unionist and don't want the United Kingdom to break up. But I think if it's seen as automatically being the case that this meltdown of the DUP then translates into a post-Brexit surge in demands for a united Ireland, the evidence is not there for it in the polling. I was really interested in a bit of polling which was highlighted by Henry MacDonald in the Times last Saturday, which got very little play because it, as I say, it runs counter to that narrative, that London narrative of the union's at risk and Brexit is going to blow up the union. But it was a survey by, it's called the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, an academic survey. Comes with a health warning, and that there was some criticism about what its numbers showed in terms of party vote share. It's not really that kind of study. It's trying to get under the skin of how social attitudes are changing in Northern Ireland. Well, firstly, I mean, it demonstrated, or it suggested that more than 50%, and this is the latest in a line of polls showing that support for the union is still some way ahead, but was at 53%, and support for United Ireland at 30%. But the interesting thing, which is Henry MacDonald, who wrote the story and highlighted it, and pointed out that it should be getting more attention, is what it demonstrated about secular opinion, because of course Northern Ireland is becoming, and this may end up being what does for the DUP or engineers some kind of rethink over the course of the next 5-10 years about what unionism is, is that you may see the birth of a more secular unionism. Maybe too late to get the old UUP back, but it shows that actually support for the union seems pretty robust among those who are secular, and you can see any future campaign, or maybe it wouldn't even get to a border poll, having a very powerful message around stuff which is, public issues like public services. That you can frame it in terms of, well, why leave? Not just why do you leave the UK? Don't just think of it in terms of the flag, but why leave the National Health Service? Now, of course, Northern Ireland has its own health service, but it is connected to the UK Health Service and
Same
operates
principles,
on a basis, which the Republic of Ireland doesn't have. So I just thought it was a very interesting counterpoint that it's there for unionists if they think carefully and cleverly about how to form a new, optimistic, secular approach to defending the union. I think it's not all doom and gloom.
No, well, it certainly reassured me as a unionist. But on the subject of the union, Ian, before we go, I turned my camera around today to sort of have a little bit of a footballing theme to my backdrop. We're recording before the Scotland-England game. How optimistic? How many goals do you think you're going to score this evening? How much are you going to win by, do you think?
Well, that's a picture of Old Trafford, which just makes me wish that we had Alex Ferguson as Scotland manager. That's very unfair to Steve Clarke, former St Mirren player, of course, before he went to Chelsea. I think it's fair to say that Scots are not really looking forward to this. What happened in our first game was pretty humiliating, and because hopes were high, Scotland have got some really good players. There was a sense that, as we've talked about before, Tim, it's different this time. This is the time where we ditch our sort of historical jinx, and Scotland will actually get through for the first time ever into the group stages. But that first game was so humiliating that I think we go into this evening's game really quite fearful. And before we started recording, I said, well, maybe the weather will help the fact that it's raining. That's how desperate we Scotland fans are. We hope that somehow battle conditions will be like Bannockburn and we'll triumph against the odds, but I'm sceptical.
Well, I'm just glad we were both in London yesterday evening, and I'm just glad I was there yesterday evening rather than this evening, because on my train home last night, I had a few Scottish people in the carriage with me, and I had a little bit of a rendition of Yes Sir, We Can Boogie going on, and I thought, right, I'm glad I'm not going to be here this time tonight.
This is the contrast with, I mean, to me, this is, as a fixture, personally, I hold this fixture so dear. It's such a formative experience for me, those games in the 70s, and remembering, I was too young to go to them, but I remember the Scottish invasion in 1977. There was the disgraceful but highly amusing pitch invasion.
Disgraceful but amusing.
Disgraceful but amusing, where the Scotland fans broke the crossbar, and Rod Stewart got his Rolex stolen as well, because Rod Stewart, as a Scotland fan, went on the pitch with wearing his Rolex and then came off having been shaken. He had his hand shaken by victorious Scottish fans so many times he didn't notice that his watch had been stolen.
Brilliant story.
But I can remember in '77 as a kid, London being full of Scotland fans. Scotland has always taken this game, this clash, more seriously than the English have, and the English find it faintly amusing, and it really matters to Scotland to win. But that thing in the 70s and into the 80s was happening at a period when Scots, and to an extent the Irish as well, dominated English football. So that teams like Manchester United or Liverpool were Celtic in their outlook and their staffing and their star players and their managers. So it seemed then in the 1970s and 1980s that, of course, England had won the World Cup in 1966, but that Scotland was smaller but capable of competing, and the English game needed the Scots. The dynamic post the revolution in English football, partly facilitated by a great Scot in management, Alex Ferguson, changes.
Sir Alex, please, if you don't mind.
But so all of that is gone. But still, for Scots like me who really care about the fixture, there's nothing that matters more. Even weirdly, as a unionist who loves England and loves living in England, it really matters to beat England. But I'm not holding my breath for tonight.
Maybe have a scotch or two at your side, just in case you need some pain relief.
Possibly, we'll see. England were scarily good the other day, I thought, actually. Yeah. But until next time, thank you for watching and listening to Reaction. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, just click the button subscribe for more of these conversations and guests. And if you're not a subscriber to Reaction, to the main site, and you want my newsletter, which I think this week will be, I suspect, about cracks in the blue wall and what happens to the Tory party longer term, then go to the site. You can subscribe there. It's really easy, and you get invites to our live events, which are coming back. But until next time, thank you for watching.